All right, guys, so today we're going to be talking about running the 40-yard dash. So we're going to talk about the specifics of the 40-yard dash, the different parts of it, and then how to train for each part of the 40-yard dash. All this is going to come together to help you run the fastest and most efficient 40-yard dash that you could possibly run. So we're going to break it down into 4 parts. The first part is going to be the setup. So we talked about that last week, made a whole video about it. Make sure you check it out if you haven't. And that's going to set you up to have a strong first 3 steps, which is going to set you up for a really good 40-yard dash. The setup is probably the most important part of your 40. The second part is going to be the drive phase. So that's going to be the rapid buildup of speed, going from 0 to 100 as fast as you can. Then you have the transition phase. So that's going to be the second part of your acceleration phase. It's going to be the gradual buildup that gets you to max velocity. And then the third phase is going to be the max velocity phase. That's just going to be your max speed that you can possibly attain. Now, when looking at the 40-yard dash, usually elite athletes, so usually combine athletes and elite high-level athletes can get the 40-yard dash done in 17 to 20 steps in total. Now, high school athletes, on the other hand, can get the 40-yard dash done in usually anywhere from 18 to 23 steps. Now, the difference in elite 40-yard dash runners versus non-elite 40-yard dash runners is going to be the force that you put in the ground. So really good 40-yard dash runners, really fast athletes can put a lot of force in the ground. Not only can they put a lot of force in the ground, but they know where to apply that force at. So the direction of force is largely important to running an efficient 40-yard dash. If you can put your force in the right direction to propel you forward and limit the braking forces that you have, you're going to be in a good position to run a good 40-yard dash. Then lastly is how efficient you are on ground contact, so your ground contact times. Basically, how little time you spend on the ground, how fast and elastically you can rebound, maintain lower limb stiffness, and produce force at a really fast rate. So in order to give you guys a visualization or a picture of what the 40-yard dash looks like, I created this beautiful diagram to show you guys the projection and body angles and the direction of forces in the 40-yard dash. So as you get into your drive phase early on, it's characterized by a horizontal body angle and horizontal force. So you're really trying to drive out horizontally, gain speed, gain momentum. Then as you get to your transition phase, this is characterized by a more gradual buildup from getting horizontal to getting to true verticality. So that's going to be the slower acceleration phase, the second part of your acceleration. It's going to be characterized by getting a little bit higher every single step that you get closer to max velocity. So your body gets more upright, your forces get more vertical. And then you get to your max velocity phase towards the end. And that's going to be characterized by upright sprint mechanics. It's going to be characterized by vertical limb stiffness, lower limb stiffness, and elasticity. So your forces are going to be more vertical in order to conserve your momentum and all the speed that you've built up to this point once you get to that max velocity. Then the distance of each phase is going to change based on a couple factors. So we see that the drive phase is mainly about 0 to 10 yards. The transition phase is normally about 10 to 20. And the max velocity phase is anywhere from 20 to 30 yards and onward. But that's going to change based off, one, your relative strength. So how strong you are relative to your body weight. Usually stronger athletes can maintain the drive phase a lot longer. If you're a weaker athlete relative to your body weight, you normally get vertical a lot quicker. And it's also going to change based off your max velocity ceiling. So faster athletes can drive and transition a lot longer than slower athletes. If you're a faster athlete, you may not get to your max velocity until 30 to 35 yards because you have more speed to build up. And if you're a slower athlete, you might get to your max velocity phase. You might get to your max velocity phase at 20 yards and only drive for about 10. So you're going to get to your max velocity quicker. It's going to be harder to maintain that velocity. And it's also going to change based off your anthropometric. So basically your body type, your hip, femur length, leg length, torso length, and things like that. So with the setup, we already talked about it in the last video, so we're not going to go too deep into it. But that setup is going to set up the first 3 steps. So with that first step, you want to really cover ground and get to 1 yard. Then you really want to focus on being strong before you're fast. And then you want to gain ground in your first 3 steps. So that's really going to be where you build up the most speed and produce the most amount of force. Then we get into your drive phase. So that's going to be the first 10 yards, about 10 yards of your 40-yard dash. Now you really ideally want to cover 10 yards in 6 steps. But again, it's going to change on the level of athlete that you are. Now the drive phase is characterized by horizontal force. So you really focus on going outward, striking back. And this is going to rely on strength, so your relative strength levels, and it's going to rely on your force bias power, so your ability to really apply force into the ground. Now this is going to be characterized by a low heel recovery, so keeping your heels low to the ground so you can rapidly reverse the thighs, rapidly put force in the ground, and limit cyclical action because we really don't want to cycle early on in the dry phase. It's also going to be characterized by a positive body angle. So you can see in this beautiful diagram here, this guy's focused on driving out. It's all horizontal. My body's going forward. I'm trying to drive. Now, you really want to drive before you run. So your focus is just drive, 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 attack the ground. You'll build speed that way. Then also, it's also characterized by striking behind your center of mass. So you don't want to strike in front of your center of mass. It's going to produce a lot of braking forces. What you want to do is strike behind the hip. And then where you strike and attack the ground is going to project you where you want to go. So if you strike behind the center of mass, you're propelling yourself horizontally. Then lastly, piston and rapid thigh reversal. So we want our thighs, as mentioned, not to cycle. We don't want any cyclical leg action in that dry phase. You want piston-like action where it's just straight out and back, and then a rapid thigh reversal. So once that knee punches out, we want it to rapidly strike back and punch back at a very fast rate. Now, ways to train this dry phase is going to be a lot of resistance sprints. So we're talking hill sprints, sled marches. We're talking manual resistance sprints, any kind of sprint that's going to require resistance because it's going to require a greater amount of force application into the ground. It's going to allow you to drive longer, and it's going to allow you to create more horizontal force. Another way to train is going to be the horizontal jump. So you want your plyometrics to really be focused around horizontal force and horizontal output. Then of course short sprints. So because your dry phase doesn't last that long, maybe 10, 15, maybe 20 yards, we really want to focus on these short sprints, really focusing on getting that horizontal output, sprinting short sprints, and accelerating. Now some technique work that you can do. You can do some wall drills, focus on technique, really focus on getting that horizontal body position. You can focus on the A series for top-down force generation and posture. And you can focus on marches for the same thing, top-down force generation and posture as well. So if you look at this little guy here, we can see that his thighs are moving straight out and back. You can see his body angle is horizontal, and he's putting force directly behind his hip in order to limit the braking forces and shoot himself that way. So hips are in a piston-like action, rapid reversal, force back, project out. Then next we have the transition phase, which is just going to be an extension of the dry phase where we start to get a lot more vertical. This is going to be that build to verticality, or the gradual rise, or the gradual build up to speed. Now, if you look at these arrows, this is going to be the vectors of force. So you start to get a little bit less horizontal and a little bit more vertical. It's like that transitional force to get to verticality. Now, this relies on a very even distribution of power. So your accelerative qualities and your force producing qualities. And that also relies on your max velocity ceiling. So if you're a really faster athlete, as mentioned before, you can transition longer, and you'll transition up until later parts of the 40-yard dash. And vice versa. If you're a slower athlete, transition phase will be lower. You'll get there a lot quicker. Now, this is going to be characterized in a gradual increase in thigh amplitude. So this is where you start to go from that piston-like action to a cyclical-like action of your legs to turn over, cycle, and conserve momentum. Now, it's also going to be characterized by a decrease in ground contact time. So for every stride that you take in the 40-yard dash, your ground contact time slowly reduces. So you spend less time on the ground, your thigh amplitude increases and becomes more reliant on vertical stiffness and less reliant on those strength and force bias qualities. Now, the ways to train it is going to be your fly. So that's really going to focus on your transition to verticality. So different flies like 10-yard fly with the 5-yard lead in, or 10-yard fly with the 10-yard lead in. It's going to really focus on that transition phase and also build up. So you get to actually feel what it's like to slowly transition and get to verticality. Now, some technique work is going to be the dribble series. So this is where you start to turn over, start to get cyclical leg action. So you can really focus on the dribbles, getting that leg action done, and then crescendo runs. So learning how to build up, slow down, get a gradual build up to speed, and learn how to relax, but also get to verticality. So once you complete your first 3 parts of the 40-yard dash, which is going to be the acceleration phase of your 40-yard dash, we start to get into your max velocity. Now, your max velocity is just your max speed, so the highest attainable speed that you can possibly get to. Now, this is going to be characterized by vertical force and stiffness. So as we get to your dry phase, we start up being horizontal, you transition from horizontal to vertical, and now you're at true verticality when it comes to your max speed. Now, your max speed relies on a couple of things. It's going to rely less about force and strength and more about power, lower limb stiffness, elasticity, and pure velocity. So how well you can maintain your hip, knee, and ankle structure and just bounce off the ground. Same thing with elasticity. How well you can transmit forces through the ankle and bounce off the ground. And then pure velocity. So how fast can you turn over? How fast can you apply force into the ground? Now, max velocity, max speed is going to be characterized by a cyclical leg action. So as opposed to acceleration, where it's just a piston-like action out and back, you begin to start cycling and really get large cycling out of your max velocity. So that's going to be characterized by your recovery and your swing. So as you swing, as you get to your max velocity, you have to bring the knee up and get it to your belt line in triple flexion. Then from here, you have to wind down and whip from the hip. You have to attack down and through the ground, eccentrically lengthen your knee as you approach the ground, strike underneath. That's going to be your swing phase. Then as you push through the ground, extend through the hip, you have to recover by bringing the leg back up high and tight, dorsiflexed, bringing it back up to that triple flexion line to get back into your swing. It's also going to be characterized by verticality. So this is when we get to our true upright sprint mechanics and vertical posture. So we're up, neutral pelvis, I'm sprinting, and I'm vertical. Now, ways to train your max speed are going to be a couple things. It's going to be build up. So this is going to allow you to tap into that max velocity. Now, the faster the athlete that you are, the longer you have to build up to get to your true max velocity. It's also going to be trained by sprints of greater than 20 yards. So for athletes who are slower, you may get that max velocity exposure from 25 and 30 yards. For athletes who are really fast, you might not get it until 35, 40, 45 yards. So training sprints that are longer than 20 yards are going to really tap into this max velocity where you get the highest attainable speed that you could possibly get to. Now, when it comes to training technique, there's a couple things you can do. We have the A series for posture and top-down force generation. So getting here, triple flexion at the belt line. You also have your fire series. So this is going to teach you how to cycle. It's going to teach you that cyclical leg action of the ground, help you to swing and recover and get back high and tight. You also have the dribble series. So this is just going to further focus on that cycling leg action, getting your legs to cycle and actually push through the hip underneath your hip. You really don't want to land in front of your hip at max velocity. You really want to land underneath your hip to limit the braking forces and just immediately propel off the ground and go forward. And then you also have your switch series. So this is going to allow you to focus on also your posture, but also your ability to get to the belt line and rapidly switch up and down from that position to generate a lot of force. Now, if you look at the little diagram, the little guide that we have of this guy running a beautiful max velocity sprint, you see that he's more upright as opposed to this guy who's accelerating. He's horizontal. He's upright. His knee gets up to the belt line. He's whipping out and back. So he's really whipping from the hip to strike underneath his hip. And this other leg is coming around and cycling through. So the cyclical leg action becomes this little motion right here as opposed to the acceleration where it's just out and back. All right, so to put it all together, let's summarize the 40-yard dash. So first, your setup. You have to master the setup. Then your setup and your drive phase is all about violence. So it's all about how aggressively can you put force behind the center of mass and in the right direction. Once you get through that violent phase, you get to the transition phase. So that's going to be part 3. That's going to be where we get that controlled violence and we get that gradual build up to max velocity. Then the fourth part, your max velocity, once you get there, it's about poetry. So you go from violence to controlled violence to poetry. It's still aggressive and violent, but there's a smooth, relaxed aspect to it. So violence, controlled violence, poetry, finish through the 40. Now, in conclusion, I'll just go over some quick notes. So first, as I've mentioned 1,000 times, you have to master the start. So spend time doing it. Refer back to the last video. Learn the start, master it, and that's going to set up a really good 40-yard dash. 2, improve your ability to accelerate. So improve your acceleration. If you improve your acceleration, you're going to improve your ability to build speed fast. You only have 40 yards. You want to get to that speed, that max velocity as fast as you can. 3, improve your max velocity. So improve and build on your speed ceiling. The faster you are, the longer you can drive, the lower your 40 time is going to be. And then last, understand the best 40-yard dashes ever come with a combination of high amounts of force put in the right direction with very small contact times and a very high turnover rate. So a very high recovery from the ground up and back down. If you have high force, good direction, small ground contact times, and a high turnover rate, you're going to run a really fast 40 especially if you put everything together just like we talked about. So that's going to conclude the 40-yard dash video. I hope to help you guys understand what the 40-yard dash looks like, what to look for in it, how to train for it, and then understanding the 4 different parts of the 40-yard dash, and then how to put it all together to run the fastest 40-yard dash time that you can possibly run.